One thing that many of us struggle with in the spiritual life is the consequence of comparison. And when I say comparison, I'm referring to the fact that it's very difficult as a fragile human being not to compare ourselves to others. Now, when I say compare ourselves, I don't necessarily mean like, am I better or worse, or am I more spiritual or less spiritual? But there's something, I think, implicit that's just a little deeper, which is that we want to know that we're on the right track and feel affirmed. And we do that often by trying to look at the lives and journeys and stories of others. Well, that's informative and that's helpful, unless we run into a very basic problem, which is that we identify so strongly with who we are and what we do and how we do things on our spiritual path that we ultimately end up judging or rejecting those who do things differently. Now, again, if we are identified with how we do things in our spiritual life, then that means we are fundamentally emotionalizing the way we do things. And then that turns into my religion's right and yours is wrong, my type of yoga is right and yours is wrong, my favorite spiritual teacher is right and yours is wrong, or I would say worse, the modern version doesn't look quite so black and white. We don't say they're wrong. Well, we cut them up in other ways. You know, they're too egotistical, they're too intellectual, they're too physical, they're too self-absorbed, whatever it is, we just create some psychological jargon to justify our judgments. But in the end, this propensity to judge and other people whose spiritual practices we don't match with is unfortunately normal if we lack a certain basic amount of self-awareness. So I want to share something here that probably is new to a lot of you because you're because of the way you found this, and maybe some of you this is going to be very old news. So in the book Return to the Sacred, which I wrote years ago, a book that was actually quite popular, one of the things that I talk about is some research I did for a year into spiritual practice and what were the most effective and predominant practices that we see in the world today. Well, first of all, I want to let you know that I thought very naively that I was going to come upon one practice that was going to somehow transcend or perfect them all, like the best practice. Or perhaps a composite. So a practice in which if you do this, and combine that, then you're going to have everything you need. In the end, what I discovered was something different, which is that no matter what you try to claim as the best spiritual practice, there will never be a better answer than what is the best spiritual practice for me right now. And that, in my mind, is really the only useful question. What is the best spiritual practice for me right now? Are there some spiritual practices that probably all or most of us could benefit from all or most of the time? Yeah, I think so. I think that some movement-based practice can be good for body awareness and grounding and helping the nervous system. I think some basic meditation is probably helpful for all of us at some level. And being open to exploring ideas without attachment and curiosity. I think these three simple things can be very enriching no matter who you are. On the other hand, that's just not always true. What I found is that out of the thousands of practices that we see in the world, there are patterns. So on one hand, we can't say that there's one ultimate practice, but we also can't say that there are thousands and they're all separate and different and good and right. Because ultimately, it's my experience that those thousands of spiritual practices are actually quite easily organized into 4 categories of practice and 12 types, right? So that's 12 types. That means 3 basic types in 4 basic categories. So the 4 categories of practice are mental practices, emotional practices, physical practices, and spiritual practices. Or I should say spirit practices, because they're all spiritual. Anyone can benefit from any of these, and in some moments of our life, we may be attracted to all of these. But here's what separates the 4. Mental practices are fundamentally oriented around mental work or thought. Physical practices are fundamentally oriented around the body and something you do. And emotional practices are typically relational. They involve connection and human emotion as part of the glue or energy that potentiates that practice. And spirit practices are practices that tend to try to strip away our attachments to ordinary life and really strongly orient us around a non-material reality. So those are the 4 basic areas. Now, I'm not going to make this the world's longest video. If you want to learn about what the 12 types of practices are, you can check out the book Return to the Sacred, or stay tuned, because I'll probably do it in another video. The most important thing I can leave you with right now is whatever is your natural proclivity or orientation or personality, you are going to identify with and emotionalize. Identify with and emotionalize. And that means that when other people promote or derive satisfaction from something that you don't identify with, the unconscious impulse will be to judge, to criticize, and make it wrong because it will not feel good to you. That's the emotionalizing part. But remember, that reaction is only an indication that that is for someone else, not for you. It doesn't mean anything about the actual value of that practice or what other people can get out of it. As with so much in life, to make the most of your spiritual journey, the only really valuable question is, what do I need right now? What works and what moves me towards something enriching and uplifting? And as far as what other people do, I can learn from it, and then with a breath of kindness, let it go and let others live their own lives their own way. Stay tuned.